Courtney Shorter. I want to welcome you to the Plastic Couch podcast. Courtney is the co-author of the new book coming out called Resilience Rising, Stories of Infertility and Finding Joy that she has co-authored with 6 other women. And so I want to welcome you, Courtney, to the Plastic Couch podcast.
Can I just tell you, I love the Plastic Couch. I wish I had thought of that myself. I love it. Just so you know.
Thank you. So it means a lot for us today because, the plastic, what I say it represents is just a lot of, the guilt, the shame, the fear, like all of this stuff that we definitely don't talk about a lot or enough. And as we're talking today about pregnancy and infant loss and resilience and finding joy after pain, there's a lot that's underneath the plastic. So, Courtney, you ready to get started?
Yeah, let's get started.
So before we get to the book, let's talk about your fertility journey. So take us back and tell us where everything began.
Honestly, it probably began in college, to be honest, right? Because I was with my now husband. He was my boyfriend in college, like my later years in college, not the early years. I was a mess the early part of college. But later,
we all were. Okay, go ahead.
Later in college, I met this guy. We, we're boyfriend and girlfriend. Clearly we were not practicing abstinence, but I never got pregnant. And I knew at the time that I had like this thing called a pituitary tumor, which makes your body think you're already pregnant. Is the easiest way to explain it. It's like a whole lot of other medical jumbo that goes with that, but easiest way to explain it, your body thinks you're already pregnant, so you don't necessarily ovulate, and you can produce breast milk. I didn't do that piece, but I didn't even realize that ovulation wasn't happening. You're in college, you're young, you're like, whatever.
Right.
I'm glad I'm not pregnant. Like, I'm glad it's not.
Yeah. So tell us, like, when did you find that out? Like, what was that point? Was it a doctor's appointment? What happened?
It was a doctor's appointment. I went to the doctor. I had never had regular monthly cycles, but I just, again, being young, you're just like, whatever. Okay, whatever. And then once we graduated, got married, got really serious about like, okay, this is my person. We're going to be together. We're going to have a family. Then it became more of like, wait, why is it not regular? Why have we never gotten pregnant? Because we clearly have not been practicing using protection all the time, right? And so then we became more serious about like figuring out what was going on. And so when we got the diagnosis, it was just like, okay. And for years, we really didn't do anything with the information besides like there was like a medication that they gave me to like make the tumor shrink, make it smaller. It was either take the medication or have surgery. And the doctor at the time was like, let's just start with the medication, see if that works. So I would like take it off and on every now and then. I do good for a few months. And again, being young in a relationship, young in age, just like whatever, it'll happen. No rush. And then we really got serious about wanting to start a family and realized it was not happening and was not going to happen. And then realized like not only is it not happening, not going to happen naturally, it's expensive as shit to now start a family the non-traditional way that we'd heard about, whether it was adoption, IVF, IUI, like whatever. It was going to be expensive. And so again, being a little bit younger in our careers, my husband was working in the school system. I was working at a nonprofit. It was like, we can't even afford to begin a process like this, right?
Yeah. And Courtney, that's a really good point, because a lot of times what happens is that people automatically just go to, oh, well, listen, go ahead and adopt or IVF. But no one really talks about the thousands of dollars that costs and how insurance doesn't cover a lot, right? Mm-hmm. Things are changing now, but historically you were on your own. If you wanted to go through IVF, if you wanted to go through any of that, insurance didn't cover it. It was thousands of dollars coming out of your pocket.
And even I'll take you back a little bit ahead. I'll take you a little bit ahead just for the sake of making the point. Even once we had better jobs, making more money, better insurance, it was covered, but it still wasn't covered at 100%. So we still spent thousands of dollars for numerous attempts to have a family, have children. And as a matter of fact, took loans from 401k, still paying back the loan. So it's still, even with better jobs, more money, better insurance, it still was not 100% covered. It still wasn't fully covered.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a great point, because there's a lot of trauma involved in the infertility journey, and the financial trauma is just one part of it, right?
That's one part of it. Yeah.
Yeah. So take us back to so now you and your husband are serious about it. You want to have a kid. So tell us more about that. Tell us more about your journey and what happened next.
Yeah, then it becomes okay, now we're ready. What do we do? And so, we went to a endocrinologist, met with him. He gave us the option, told us the price.
Yeah.
I was just like, no, like we're never having a family. And that is a different part of the heartbreak too, because you're like, we can't afford it. We'll never be able to afford it. This doesn't make any sense. You go, you research, you do insurance, there are grants, there are a lot of people that do grants, there are a lot of scholarships, but then it's like, okay, you're at this point in your career now where you make enough money where you don't qualify for any of these programs, but you still don't make enough money where you can afford to just write a check.
Right.
And then there were different, doctors. We went to one, I won't name the company, but one big company, and was told, you're too old, you're too fat, because you've never been pregnant. We really don't want to take you as a client. But because I had the money, it was like, we'll try it, but it probably won't work.
Mm. So what's that like? Let's stop there for a second. What is that like as a woman to be told that you're too old, too fat, this probably won't work? What's that like on the ride home even?
Right? It's crushing because you now have the money, not necessarily like can write the check with no issues, but you have the resources. You have the 401k, you have the loan, you have the credit to borrow, to do all the things. But you drive home and you're like, I'm about to give you upwards of $10,000, and you telling me it's probably not going to work. But I would say desperate, right? I'm so desperate to have a family that I'm willing to give you my money and give it a try, even though you've already told me it's probably not going to work. And you also tell me we aren't even going to do a procedure until you lose some weight. I forgot what the amount was, but some ridiculous amount of weight. And I was just like, I'm going to do it, even though I knew I couldn't. But I was just like, I'm just ready to like give you all my money. And then, you'll get right sets in and you're like, no, I'm not giving you $10,000. Why? Because of the way you treated me. And two, like, it doesn't even make sense that I'm going to give you all this money for something that you said doesn't work. And to be honest, like, I had gone away for a weekend with my best friend and I had a dream. So my husband's mom is deceased. And I'd had this dream. We were in a hotel. I had this dream. And in the dream, his mom spoke to me in the dream and she said, you don't need them. Don't give, like, basically, like, you don't need them. Don't give them your money. And so I woke up the next day and I told my best friend, I was like, I'm not going to go through with that procedure with that particular endocrinologist. And went back to a previous endocrinologist that I'd seen. And he, took me as a client with no stipulations. We used him before when we had the girls, which we'll talk about later. But went back to him and now we have Hendrix. But even getting to him was such a journey that was nights and nights and days of tears and just all the things it took to get the little man that we have now. But it was a journey.
Yeah. So let's dig a little bit deeper into that journey. So you definitely had something going on with your body, which, you talked about earlier, where it tricked your body into thinking that you were pregnant, but then when was the first time that you experienced grief from having a miscarriage?
Gosh, it's been so long. Like I don't even recall like the years and the day. Like there's some days I don't recall,
Yeah.
right? Because you block it out. But the moment you don't forget. And I remember the first time being told you are pregnant and then being told there's nothing in the sack. You're like, huh? Right. And that
Yeah.
literally probably was about maybe 4 weeks, 4 to 6 weeks after being told I was pregnant. And that was like a IUI. And the difference between IUI and IUF, there's a slight difference. IUI is like, gosh, it's like considered like a fresh transfer. I'm not even gonna get into medical terms because I don't want to
Yeah.
confuse anybody who's listening. But it was an IUI, and he's like, "Oh, you're pregnant." And then when we go back to measure the baby, he's like, "There's nothing in the sac." So that's your first miscarriage, and you're like heartbroken because for 10 years we've been together, never been pregnant. So the first time you hear you're pregnant, you're like, this is great, this is amazing. It worked the
Yeah.
first time. Like we didn't have to spend a whole lot of money. And then you get the news that no, not real. It's like just playing. That's not happening. And it's crushing because you've gone through weeks and weeks and weeks of doctor's appointments, having blood drawn, basically you have to get your body ready for these procedures, right? And getting your body ready is shots, it's multiple doctor's appointments, it's blood work, it's laying on the table for the doctor to examine your insides, multiple times a week. So it's a lot to even get to the point where they do the insemination, and you're like, I went through all of that, and there's no baby. Like I'm so heartbroken.
Yeah. So it's like the physical pain, it's the probing, it's the emotions, all of that. Like you're like, yes, we're having a baby, right?
Yeah.
And then the letdown at the doctor's office.
It's pretty crushing the first time. And no time is easier than the next time or the last time. But it's something about that first time that still feels so disappointing. It's so crushing. It's so heartbreaking. But then we get pregnant again. And this time it goes longer. And we're excited. And what I'd never tell people is that I was actually pregnant with four babies, not two. So in the first couple of weeks of being pregnant, we lost two babies out of
Mm.
the four, which, looking back, you're like, what the hell am I going to do with four kids at one time? Right. But I was like, hey, I'm up for it. I'm game. I waited all this time to have kids. It'll be my four and done. We won't need to do this procedure again. We won't need to go through all this poking and prodding and these multiple appointments and all this thing. And this time, though, the procedure was a little bit different because we had to do what's called timed intercourse. So the first one, so the thing that a lot of people don't know about when you go through these procedures, IVF, IUI, look, whatever your doctor has said makes the most sense for you or your family, no protocol, and the protocol is the things you have to do up to the insemination, right?
Right.
No protocol is the same. So the first protocol was a little bit different. The second protocol, it was like, oh, we're going to try a different medication. We're going to try a different number of shots. We're going to try a different number of this, a different amount of this type of medicine, right? And so it really is trial and error. So that's the other piece, right? Like a lot of people don't talk about, it's not just like here's the plan, go
Right.
forth and get pregnant, right? It's
Got
like,
it. Yeah.
we're going to try this, hope it works. And then if it does work, hope you can carry, hope you can deliver. So it's like a year plus sometimes of trying to have this family. It's not just the 9 months of being pregnant. It's the months leading up to the getting pregnant that a lot of people don't know about or don't talk about because that shit is hard too. Like I said, it's shots. It's like I remember one time, so I lived in Maryland. My doctor's office was in DC. I remember in 1 month having to go to DC 3 times a week. It was an hour-long drive every day.
Yeah, it's a lot.
3 times a week for a whole month for a 5-minute appointment. That's bananas, right? And then one time I had to go.
Because even that, like the 1 hour trip, the emotions, the finding parking, the all of that.
And none of this is, an expense you can be reimbursed for, right?
Right. Yeah.
Like you're paying for parking, you're paying for gas, you're paying for the doctor's appointment, you're paying for the doctor's visit. And then one time, like when it was like leading up to the time intercourse, right? So you have to, and everything is timed. So they were like, you have to be here at 8 o'clock because we have to give you a shot in your butt before you have sex with your husband. So it's like very programmed, very timed. And so I like literally drove around DC for one evening because I had to be at 8 p.m. There was nobody in the doctor's office. Like we literally did it, not in the lobby, but like not the lobby of the building, but the lobby of the doctor's office, because it was like, it's 8 o'clock. There's nobody here. Like, just scoot your pants down. Let me give you the shot. And then you get out of here. It was like stuff like that. That's the stuff that people don't know, right? Like you see the baby, you see or sometimes you don't see the baby. Sometimes you get pregnant and the baby doesn't come or the baby doesn't survive. But it was all of that. And so we get pregnant with the 4 babies. And the endocrinologists are like, wow, like this could be a TV show. We're like, a TV show. And then I began to spot and I go to the emergency room and they were like, well, we see 2, not 4. And so again, it was like sad, but also kind of relief. Because again, I'm like imagining myself with like a 4-kid stroller trying to go to the zoo. And I'm like, that is crazy.
Right.
But again, we're willing to do it because we waited so long ago. We lose the first 2 babies. We have the 2 left. And so we're like, oh, okay, twins get through 23 weeks of being pregnant. 23 weeks, right? And we told people, we had like these cute little pictures, and I bought these like little hats that I posted on Facebook, and the picture got like 500 likes and everybody knew, and people were so excited because people knew that like we wanted kids and that we'd already had a couple of miscarriages. And so at 23 weeks, I was laying in the bed, working from home, but oxymoron, right? Laying in the bed working from home. Take the laying in the bed part out. No. I was working and I was giving a presentation at work over like Zoom or something. And I was like, I have to use the bathroom. And when I went to the bathroom, it was the scariest thing I ever seen. And so I called my husband, who didn't answer because he was at work. I called my best friend who had literally just had a baby in May. So we're talking about June. So her daughter was 2 months. I called my mom, who didn't answer.
That's so scary.
Let me call 911 because
Yeah.
none of my people are answering the phone. And so I call 911. I live in this building that you have to be buzzed into. You can't just walk up. And I'm like, Lord, like what? It was crazy. The dog, we have a dog, so the dog knows something's going on. Dogs are very intuitive, just so you know.
Right. They are. Yep.
He's like circling me, circling the house. He's just circling, like just circling. And so when the ambulance and the people finally get there, they can't get in. And at this point, it's like a massacre in the bathroom. Like I won't say more than that, but it's pretty bad, right? And so I have changed my clothes 3 times at this point. I have changed my underwear, obviously, at this point. And so the EMT people can't get into the building because the damn call box is broken. I hear them, right? I hear the sirens. Nobody's still answering their phones. The dog is circling. They're banging on the door. And I'm like, I just have to try to walk down the steps. I just have to try to get down the steps. And so I walk down the steps and they're outside. And by the time I get to them, I can barely stand up. They put me in, they sit me, they make me step into, like, the whole scenario is probably the worst day of my life, but at the same time, like, a great day, but the worst day of my life. Like, I co- they don't even help me into the ambulance. I step up by myself. I sit on the gurney. They don't lay me down. I asked them to take me to a different hospital, not the one in my neighborhood, because I knew it was a shit show. So they take me to the one in my neighborhood. They're like, ma'am, you are bleeding. We can't, bypass one hospital and take you to another one. We have to get you to the closest one. So go there. Essentially, again, there's just blood everywhere. And what was happening was, the placenta is the thing that kind of like protects the baby while they're growing and make sure the baby gets food. And so one of the placentas ruptured.
Okay.
And so what that means is, like, one of the girls wasn't getting oxygen, wasn't getting food, which causes the bleeding. And so, get to the hospital. There's a nurse. She's very abrupt. She's like, get up on the table. And I'm like, what do you want? How do I get up on the table? And I'm like, man, what do you want me to do? Like, my clothes are completely soiled. They have not offered me clothes, underwear, a pad, like nothing. They're just like, get up on the bed. So I get up on the bed. And by this point, I have reached, I can't remember if that was my mom or my best friend. I've reached somebody by this point, and
Right.
they've called all the people or whatever. So then this doctor comes in. She doesn't introduce herself. She's just like looking. She's talking to the nurse. She never addresses me. And then the other doctor, he's like a high risk doctor. And that's like who you would see if you have a high risk pregnancy. And he just so happened to be on staff that day. So he takes over. He's the one who tells me about the abruption, and, because it's twins and they can't tell which twin it is, the babies are still fine at this point. Heart's beating, they're still fine. But because they can't tell which placenta ruptured, he's like, we have to deliver both kids. If it was just one, we could like fix it, or, if we could tell which twin it is. My memory tells me that he said something like, we could deliver one and leave the other. That might not be accurate, but like my
Right.
memory makes me believe that that's what I heard, at least.
Yeah, because there's a whole bunch going on. Whole bunch going on. Yeah.
Yeah. So the end of it, it was the most traumatic thing I've ever experienced. And I remember the doctor telling my mom and my husband, I can't save both of them, or all. Well, she kept saying it was one baby. So she said, I can't save both of them. And there was this thing in me that bubbled up and said, I have two kids, not one. What are you talking? Like, I literally wanted to like wring this doctor's neck.
Yeah.
And she's like telling my mom and my husband, like, you got to decide which one you want me to save. And then there's this nurse that comes in, and she like gets down to my ear because I'm laying on the bed, and she gets down to my ear and she says, I'm going to stay with you. I got you. I'm going to stay with you. I don't remember her exact words, but she was just like, don't worry, even though, we're all worried at this point, but, she was very calm. Like, there was so much chaos in the room, like with people going in and out, and, you're going to pass away and you're bleeding and we can't stop the bleeding. You're going to need a blood transfusion. And just so like, we're going to will you back for emergency C-section and all these things. And then this pediatric doctor comes in and she says, I got to tell you, babies this small don't typically survive. Sometimes they do. More likely they don't. But we're going to do everything that we can to save your babies. And I was like, okay. I mean, at this point, it's like, I don't have any options, right? It's like, deliver the baby, save my life, or don't deliver the babies and we all pass away, right? It's like,
yeah.
right?
It's so much, Courtney. And before you continue, the reason why I'm tearing up right now is because I'm thinking all of this stuff going on, all of this chaos, all of this commotion, and for this nurse to just crouch down and speak in your ear very calmly. It's like, that's the first person who saw you in
The
all of
first
this.
person in all of this. And by this point, I've encountered 2 EMTs, a doctor, a nurse, the person who checks you in at admissions because they want to make sure you have health insurance. At least 8 people at this point, at least 8 people. And the only 2 people out of that whole team was the MFA doctor and this nurse that crouched down. And then the pediatric doctor who was not abrupt, but just matter of fact, right? It wasn't warm and fuzzy, but
Right. Yeah.
But this nurse, she went with me into the surgery room. My husband, he had on his scrub to go into the room, and they wouldn't let him in. And I just remember seeing him stand at the door and the door closing. And so I was in there by myself. Like I was in there, it was just me, the team, doctors, and this one nurse who just kept saying, "I'm not going to leave you." After that point, I I know that like my best friend is there with her 2-month-old. Mike is there, my mom is there, and they're not letting anybody in the room with me. And the only person in the room with me is this nurse who just keeps saying, "I'm not going to leave you. I'm not going to leave you." And then when I wake up, I'm in, recovery. I know that we've delivered 2 little girls. We named them Ryan and Morgan. My husband has taken pictures of them. They look like little hot dogs. They're bright red. They're really, really tiny, but they're here. And I don't get to see them right away. And when I finally see them, they're just so, so tiny and so, so little. They were about 1 pound, less than a pound, less than a pound. And they had this amazing pediatrician. I don't even know if they call like a NICU pediatrician a pediatrician. I don't know what
Right.
their title is, but they were in the NICU, obviously, and they had this loving, amazing pediatrician who just kept saying, "We're going to take care of them. We're going to do all that we can." I still talk to her to this day, 7 years later. She's retired from being a doctor because of some medical issues of her own. But even every now and then we check in, we say hello. She asks how Hendrix is doing. Out of the most terrible experience, those 2 people, the nurse and this doctor, are 2 people that made the experience not as traumatizing as it really was, because the hospital itself was so awful and the staff was so awful. But the NICU staff took care of the girls. And, it's funny that October is Pregnancy and Infant Loss Awareness Month because they were originally due in October, even though they were born in June. They were actually due October 5th, which was yesterday. Today's the 6th. So they were due yesterday. They came in June. And so, the NICU life was hard. We were there every day, all day. I just had a C-section. I was freezing cold. I was losing weight. I wasn't eating. But I was like, I don't care. I'm just going to stay as long as it takes to take care of my girls. And, Dad was like, I just got to get them home and they'll be fine. And then we get a call, and they said, this was like maybe 3 days after Morgan was born. We get a call. I was still in the hospital at this time because I was still recovering. Get a call and they say, we think you should come down to the NICU because Morgan's not doing well. And I was like, what does that mean? So when we get down there, they, basically tell us that her lungs are severely underdeveloped, which we knew, but that they have given her like the maximum amount of oxygen, the maximum amount of everything that would be helping her survive or helping her live. And they said it's actually doing more damage to her because everything is so high. And they said that she probably wasn't going to make it through the night. And I was just like, what do you mean? You're supposed to be doing all that you can do.
Yeah.
And this older nurse from India, she tells me like what they do in her culture and all this thing. And I was looking at this lady like, if you don't get out of my face. But um,
Meaning like talking about, give me like, what was she
yeah, I
talking
don't
to you
remember
about?
what she said.
Oh,
Like
so you were
after she,
just like, yeah, okay.
yeah, I just know like after she finished talking, I was just like, if you don't get out of my face and go save my daughter, right? But
Mm.
then something set in, and Mike and I were like, this isn't. She's not going to make it, and it makes no sense to like continuously put her through all of these things that they have to do. Because at this point, they were drawing blood. She was on the ventilator. She had been under the blue light, like everything, you know. And they took her off the machine. The nurse, I don't know what it's called, but like this thing where she was kind of like pressing this thing that was helping her breathe off the machine. And it was just like long enough for me to hold her and Mike to hold her. And then they put her in this, no, they put that, I was after. So once she stopped this thing, this manual breathing thing, Morgan took 2 or 3 breaths and she was gone in my arms. And I like literally just broke down. You know, by that point, I had already called my mom. My mom had come up. I think my brother came too. And they took us back to like this family room. We took pictures with her in her dress. You know, she had this little white dress, white hat. And in the moment, it felt normal, right? It was like, this is your daughter. You got to get these pictures. You won't obviously get this opportunity again. And then through the grieving in that first year, I would look back to my phone and those pictures would pop up. And I'd be like, how the hell you take pictures with a dead child? Like, that's sick and that's crazy. And nobody does that. But that was the grief. And then now, years later, I'm glad I have the pictures because they're the memory that I cherish. Like, I don't have pictures of, like, I have thousands of pictures of Hendrix. I have 20 pictures of Ryan and Morgan. So I'm so glad I have them because I have both, right? I have pictures of her being alive and I have pictures of her on her last day with us. And so the emotion has gone up and down around the pictures, is what I was saying.
Yeah. And I mean, and honestly, Courtney, that is so, like, there's so much in other cultures that is so normalized that is very like, sometimes we feel bad or we feel shame or all of these things around it. The one thing I've learned about grief and loss is that whatever you choose to do is the right thing.
Hmm.
It's the right thing for you.
I'm definitely at that point now. It took me a while to get there, I'll be honest. But even like I said, I was starting to say, even in that moment, right? So that night, they take Ryan away and there is like so much sadness, but then there's like a tiny pit of joy because you're like, okay, I can still walk over to the next incubator, the next bed, and see my other child. Like, she's still here. She's still kicking. She's eating, like all of these things that now we've lost with Morgan, we still have with Ryan. So it's like, okay, I still got to put my game face on. We still got to be mommy and daddy. And so those 3 weeks that Ryan survived, it was still a lot of the like being there every day, lots of people checking in, lots of bells, lots of alarms, lots of blood draws for her. Because at some point she also developed a brain bleed, which when infants develop a brain bleed, it normally means, or it can mean, that there will be some level of disability. A lot of times, if my memory serves me correctly, it might be associated with like cerebral palsy or something like that, is what I remember. Again, this was like 7 years ago, a doctor bringing us in a room, telling us this stuff. And I'm like furiously taking notes, trying to get it all down so that I can now share this with my mom and all these people. So I don't remember all the medicalness of it, I just
Right.
remember brain bleed and like meaning that she may have some type of disability, as she grew up. And we were like, okay, so what? We'll deal with it. Like, we waited 10 years for this kid. Like, we're going to do whatever we got to do to make sure she's good. And then at another point, like maybe 3 or 4 days after that, they called us again and they were like, she has some type of virus. We don't know what it is. We sent out a culture. We have to move her. We have to isolate her for the rest of her stay, right? Like, so she can't be on the floor with the rest of the babies. She has to be in this room where you like have to wash essentially head to toe before you go in. You have to put on like a mask, a jacket, glove, all this shit to even go into the room. And then like when you come out, you have to take it all off. And if you go back in, you got to put it all on. Like you got to throw it in the trash. And I remember one time going to see her and I left my key on the sink. So I went to wash my hands so I could go in. I left my car key on the sink. I'm all fitted up. I literally was in there for 2 seconds. I had to come out, take off all the stuff, go wash my hands again, put the stuff all the way back on. And it was just like, and then I get in there and her alarm start going off. So all the nurses and the doctors are like, you got to step out again. I'm just like, God,
It's
I'm sorry.
so much. It's so much.
But then, I mean, she's not doing better, but she's not doing worse. It's about the same. And, by this point, I've been discharged because we're talking about 3 weeks later. So we're home, but I literally don't leave the NICU until they kick me out. Like every night, I'm there all day, all night. They literally have to force me to get out. They're like, oh, you should be eating and drinking because you just had a C-section. I'm just like, if y'all don't stop telling me to go home and go to sleep, what am I going to do when I go home? I'm not going to sleep. I'm not resting. I'm literally at home thinking about my daughter. So I might as well sit here
And
and
be with my daughter. Yeah.
wait. Right. So at home one night, the phone rings. It's the NICU doctor, and she's like, "You probably should come to the NICU. Ryan's not doing well. You probably want to come." And we're at like a 10-minute drive from the hospital. So by the time we get to the hospital, now normally when we go, her room is dark. There are no lights on. And they always kept the NICU dark. Like even during the day, all the lights are off. It's just the light that each individual baby needed or, for them to see what they were doing. But in her room, we got there, all of the lights were on. There were like 20 people in the room. They're loud, running back and forth. People are talking. And I just walk in, and this one nurse, she was like from the team that does like the breathing and all that. And she's like, I hear her say something about epinephrine, I believe it was. I can't remember. I don't even remember what it was for, but it was something that she needed at the time. So at that point, I know, like somebody else tells me children's medevac is on the way. That's the helicopter to come take her to another hospital. There's nothing that they can say, like, there's nothing else we can do for her here. We're just trying to keep her breathing until the children's hospital gets here to take her. To this day, there was this young guy doing something with the machine and he wasn't doing it right. And I know he wasn't doing it right because somebody else basically was like arguing at him and like took it. And I truly believe that whatever he was doing or not doing affected Ryan. But I can't prove it. I don't know. In the moment, you're just like, what's going on? And so I grabbed Ryan's little hand and I put my finger in her hand and she grabbed my finger and I just kind of put my mouth at her ear and I said, you've done enough. It's okay. So she closed her eyes. And she's gone. Um, I wasn't holding her like I was holding Morgan, but she was holding my finger. And I just said, no, I'm doing enough. Because by this point, she'd had a CT scan of her head every day. She had blood. They had to take blood from her twice a day. They had to move her IV around several times. So she had like an IV in her foot, an IV in her arm, and her hand. Like it was just so much. She was like this big. I mean, like she was like 1 pound. And she closed her eyes and she was gone. And, the one thing about that night still stands out for me. I called my mom, I called my best friend, I called all the people. And I remember my husband saying, I don't have anybody to call because his mom and dad are both deceased and his brother's deceased as well. And in the moment, like I was so crushed that my daughter had just passed away, but I was also very crushed for my husband who had just lost both of his children and felt like he didn't have anybody to call, even though he has this large family. Like he has a huge family. And I just have like this little family that's like four of us. And so we called his uncle who came immediately. And I then I remember I told you about this one doctor who was like super amazing. She was like the lead doctor of all the people. She wasn't on shift that night, but her shift was starting. It's like while we were there. And she came in and I just remember her grabbing, like by this point, we're back in the family room again, you know, getting to say our goodbyes, taking our pictures. And she just came in the back and she just broke down and started crying. She took Ryan and she just held her. And she just kept saying, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. It was like earth shattering. It was crushing. That next day, it's so crazy how like grief makes you do like crazy shit. So the next day, they were supposed to be grieving the loss of our kids. We go back to the hospital to say goodbye to two other parents whose kids were getting discharged that day. Like we've been there together, but their two kids got to go home. So we went to say goodbye to those kids. And then there was another mom who I think her child had like just got there or been there a little bit longer. I can't remember, but we like bought her a parking pass for parking because you had to pay to park every day. Like they didn't give you free parking even though you were coming to the NICU. It's so crazy how like grief makes you do crazy things. Like we immediately went into like, what can we do for the other people mode, right?
Yeah, but I think, Courtney, that the thing about grief is that sometimes the motion, the active doing something helps you, right?
Yeah.
It's to help you. Like, and I say this all the time where we all grieve so differently that some people need to go back to work. Yeah. Some people need to not even think about work, but it's so individualized of what we need. So I think it makes perfect sense. Grief is grief. There's no right or wrong to it,
No right or wrong. And I've always been a helper, a taker care of a person.
Yeah.
And so it immediately kicked in like as early as the next day. And I remember like in the next few weeks, I began saying this thing like love is an action word. And like we don't break because people just started like showing up. Like there was food, there were like my friends had like developed this like, which I didn't know about till later. They had developed this like, how like people do the meal train? Well, I don't know what they called it, but it was like a date train. That's what I'm going to call it. Like every few days, somebody was like, oh, we're going to go to lunch. We're going to go here. We're going to go there. Let's go shopping, And in the moment, I didn't know that they were like all chatting about me whatever
Right.
you said. But I still appreciate, like, somebody washed my clothes. Like, I had braids in my hair at the time. Somebody took my braids out. Somebody like went to my mom's house and gave her, took her dinner, because the other piece to this that a lot of people don't think about is like it affects more than just the mom and the dad, right?
Yeah.
There's the grandmother who now doesn't have a grandchild. There's the brother who loses a niece and a nephew. There's the grandfather. Like there's so many immediate people who are affected by the not being able to get pregnant, the infertility, or the loss of the child, or the miscarriage. And not to say that those people should be taken care of more than the person who actually is. I'm not saying any of that at all. I'm just saying, just simply saying that it affects so many people outside of just the couple or the person who is experiencing the loss.
Yeah. And even with that, Courtney, a lot of times people just go to the mom, right?
Mm-hmm.
But Mike was a huge, like, these are his babies as well, right? So what was your experience like with watching him?
Gut wrenching, gut wrenching, gut wrenching, because he would often say things like, if I could have just got them home, I could have taken care of them, you know. And like at one point, I remember saying something about, Ryan would have had a disability. And I was just like, maybe, God didn't want us to have that burden. Not that I'm trying to choose my words carefully because there are many kids that are thriving, even with a disability. And so I'm not trying to say anything negative about it. But in the moment, you're trying to rationalize why my kids didn't survive. And one of my thoughts was like, okay, maybe God didn't want us to go through that because we were already, like, remember, we'd already been through the death of his mom, his brother, his dad, both of his grandparents in less than 5 years. In less than 5 years. And so now we've also
So
had two kids. So at least 7 or 8 people, you know, in the course of less than 5 years have passed away. And so, again, just trying to rationalize why this is happening to us. And he was like, I don't care. I would have done whatever I needed to do to have my babies. And like, true indeed, I would have too. But, in the moment, you're just trying to like pull the words to like make it better, make it make sense. And really, there are no words that make it better or make it make sense, right?
yeah,
Time makes it easier. But, I tell people all the time, this was 7 years ago. Some days it feels like 7 years, and some days it feels like yesterday, depending on what's going on that day. Yeah, yeah. But yeah, people often don't think about the dad or the other partner or I'll say the non-carrying child person, right? Because
right.
sometimes
Exactly. Yep.
sometimes it's not necessarily a mom and a dad. Sometimes a mom and a mom.
Yeah.
But people don't think about the partner who's not carrying the child.
Yeah. And that's so important for us to make that distinction, and to talk about, like what you just said, that there are there's so many different people that suffer from the grief and the loss of the miscarriage or the child, or in this case, children, that's important for us to also realize. And I think, let's talk a little bit about, so first, before you even go on, Courtney, thank you for being so honest about your story. And I don't even want to call it a story. I want to say your life, right?
Mm-hmm,
Your
mm-hmm.
life, and for sharing this with us, because it's very honest, it's very raw, and this is not the story that most people hear, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's so important for us to start talking about the things that we go through, because it always touches other people. So let's get back to your book, right? So there is a reason why you wrote this book. So let's talk about that. What's the importance of being a co-author for your coming book? Resilience Rising, Stories of Infertility and Finding Joy.
Honestly, this book, I've been writing this book for 7 years. And every time I got ready to write the book, I found a reason not to write it. It was so much easier to share my life with people. And I'm glad you said my life because I often say my story, but you're right, it's my life. It's been easier to share my life with people by talking about it. The thought of having to write it down and live on forever and ever and ever, even after I've moved on, passed on, forgotten about it, don't want to talk about it anymore. Having a book terrified me because I was like, somebody will always be able to go pick it up and read it. Versus me just telling you, you can repeat it back, but you may not get it right. You may get it wrong. You may mess up my name. You might call, like, people still call me Ryan. And I'm just like, that's not my name, but it's okay. So, but the thought of having it written out forever petrified me. So for 7 years, I was just like, I'm not doing it. Every time I would do it or write it or think about it, I'd just be like, never mind. I procrastinate. And so I went to this business conference, Rachel Ronda's business conference. I met this woman who we were talking about business, and it came up that she had recently lost a child as well. Well, not recently, but Lord, through the course of the conversation, we realized that we lost our kids at the same time, but a year apart, like literally almost to the exact day, but a year apart. And so that was probably 3, maybe even 4 years ago. And we've just kept in contact through the years. We've talked about books. We've talked about retreats. She started on her own journey to, have another child. And I literally would be on the phone with her, like, don't give up. You can do it. Like, this, what you got to do. Ask these questions. So I became like, kind of like, I'm not a therapist, but just kind of like shared my life with her, what we did, what questions we asked the doctors, like, ask the doctor this, ask them that. Right. And so she now has a rainbow baby, which she named her daughter Ryan.
Well,
And, so she called me and she was like, girl, when are we going to write this book? So, because we've talked about writing this book 3 years ago. And I just kept saying, we just both kept saying, okay. We joined like this other anthology together. And then we both were like, nope, this is not for us. Like, this is not the one we're supposed to be in. So we both got out of that one. And she called and she was like, all right, let's do it. Like, let's do it. October is Pregnancy and Infant Loss Awareness Month. It was, RyanMorgan's due date month. Like, we should do it. And I was like, okay, all right. She called me again. I was like, okay. She's like, I'm making the flyer right now to invite the other authors to see if anybody wants to participate. I was like, okay. She was like, are you in or out? I was like, okay. She's like, I'm going to post it. I'm going to tag you as one of the co-authors or one of the leading co-authors. And I was like, okay. So she posted it. I posted it. I had all these people like, you didn't tell me. Why didn't you tell me? And I was like, because if I would have told you, I would not have gone through with it. Mm-hmm. So I intentionally did not tell anybody before I posted it. Only Chantal and I knew. But literally the book has been on my heart for years. Like, people who know what we've gone through to get our rainbow baby still reach out, still ask questions, still am like people refer their friends to me. Like, my friend just had a miscarriage. Can I give her your number? Absolutely. Of course. Like, I'm no doctor. I'm no counselor. I'm no therapist. I can just share with you my life, what I did, how I attempted to get better. Thank God for therapy. The therapist I started seeing literally a week after Ryan passed away, I still see to this day.
So let's talk about that. So a part of your life story, we did not talk about Hendrix. So let's talk about Hendrix. That is your rainbow baby.
He is my rainbow after my darkest storm is what I call him. And he also was what we decided our last attempt at having a family. And it was like, if it doesn't work this time, we just won't have kids, because we looked at adoption and we couldn't afford it. We looked at surrogacy, can't afford it. And so at the time I was fortunate. I was at this company that for work that paid a significant portion of IVF. We still had to borrow money to do it. So let's not even pretend like the insurance covered it a lot. We still had to take out a loan from our 401k to do it, but it covered enough where it made it doable for us as a family. But literally, we only were going to be able to do it one time. One time. Like, that's just how expensive it was and how limited the benefits were. So we agreed, because by then, after Ryan and Morgan, we had 2 more miscarriages between Hendrix and the twins. And one of them, we had to do a forced D&C because the baby stopped growing, but wouldn't miscarry on its own. Just, yeah, life has been life and real hard. So anyway, so Hendrix was our last attempt. We decided as a couple that this would be our last attempt. And if it did not work, that we would just, remain childless for this. But so we do it. And I start this like Facebook group with my closest friends. And I'm like, I'm going to walk y'all through this journey. All I need y'all to do is pray and just give me, good vibes. And I told them, I said, you are not to share this with anybody. You are not to tell anybody. If I find out you did, we will not be friends anymore. I don't want anybody to know.
I get it. I get it. Yeah, absolutely.
For comparison's sake, well, we got pregnant with Ryan and Morgan. Remember, I told you I posted it on Facebook at like 3 months, 500 likes. With Hendrix, I did not post it on Facebook until we were 2 months away from him being born. Like maybe 3 months, because I remember saying 100 days until we meet our rainbow baby. So that's how I was like, y'all better not say anything. Like we will not be friends anymore. But anyway, so, I literally, that saved me. And then I continued with therapy to get to Hendrix. And Hendrix is now 4. And, even still with Hendrix, the other piece that a lot of people don't talk about on this journey is like, you feel so much joy with having this child, but there's so much guilt associated with the children that you didn't have or that you couldn't save. And I remember like Hendrix's first year of life, I treated him like he was a piece of glass. I was like, don't touch him, don't breathe on him, don't look at him, because I was still so nervous that it wasn't real. It wasn't going to last. Something was going to happen. And so I carried all of that grief, sadness, being scared that I experienced with all the previous miscarriages and all the pregnancies into his life for his first year. And it was like, again, don't breathe on him. Don't talk to him. He is a piece of glass. Like, he will break if you touch him.
Right. Yep. Yep.
Because there was like this joy and this like, gosh, like we finally have a child that has survived. And so also just managing the words and the language around it, because I remember the first Father's Day, people were like, hey, happy first Father's Day, Mike. And so many times I corrected people, this isn't his first one. Because people would always tell me happy Mother's Day, even though we didn't have a surviving child at the time, because they knew about Morgan and Ryan. But when it was Father's Day, it was like, happy first Father's Day. It's not his first. It's not his first, right? And so there's so much like, so many things that people don't consider on this like fertility journey. And you, as a person who's living it, you have to give people grace and understand and recognize that not everybody knows this life. Not everybody knows all the what's going on or what to say or what to do, but whatever. So, that's where we are now. We have Hendrix. He is 4. He just started pre-K for school and regular public school. You know, he's a dancer, he's a singer, he bops around the house singing songs. Like he was listening to a song this morning for the first time, Let Us See. That song by Let Us See, It's All Right.
Mm-hmm.
He's like, Mommy, why does she keep saying it's all right? So I tell him, you know, she's saying like when life is hard, it's all right. And I listen to the song a lot. It kind of got me through. And so as he gets out of the car, he's singing it. Like he's that kid that he hears a song and he like knows the words after one time. And he takes a breakdancing class. So he like spins around the house in the evening. So, you know, again, there's lots of joy, which is another reason why we wrote the book, because the trauma was so hard and it's hard. I can't even explain how heartbreaking the first year was after Morgan and Ryan passed away. When people say like their heart hurts, I felt, I could feel, I still remember what that felt like. And so the book, it was like a manifestation of like, okay, we've all been through these very hard things. And some of these stories do end with a rainbow baby, and some of them do not.
Right.
Right. And it's like, in spite of what the seven of us have experienced, some of us are still looking for the joy. Right. And so the book is not all like, oh, we all have babies now and we're happy. No, there's a story in there that it's like one of the ladies does not have a child and will not have a child because she had to have an emergency hysterectomy. Right. So it's like, it's not sad necessarily, like the experiences are sad, but it's also about what the seven of us have done to continue living, to continue feeling like we are not less than because of what we've experienced, or it's not a secret. We're not shameful. We're not guilty. We are joyful. We are living. We are trying to figure out what our next best life looks like. And so that's the point of the book. It's not just like, I've had people say, oh, is it all sad? The stories are sad. The outcome isn't necessarily sad. I mean, it's
Right.
always sad, right? Especially if you are a person who wants a family, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. But I love that. I love that because, you know, life, at the end of the day, life doesn't always get wrapped up in a pretty bow. It doesn't. And even a rainbow baby is not a pretty bow because you still have that grief and
Yep.
that loss and the guilt that is associated with Ryan and Morgan, right?
Yep. And like, what's really crazy for us, Kristen, is like Ryan and Morgan were born June. Hendrix was born in June. Our anniversary is in June. Mike's mom's birthday was June or July. I mean, like, it's just like June and July are such, it's like months of like so much joy, but also so much sadness for us. And so we've had to find ways to move through the summer and had to find ways to like not just sit in that space of sadness, right? Yeah, like it's crazy. But yeah, so the book is there. My co-authors and I did this thing and everybody told their story from their point of view and their perspective. And like I said, yes, the moments are sad, but all of the stories are not sad and they don't all end in the pretty little I had a baby and now we're happy. But
Right.
people are living and they're finding joy and they're doing things that make them happy and they are finding other ways to just live and not get stuck in the it's a shame that I don't have a family the traditional way or whatever, you know. You know, you got to be so careful how you say things on here because you don't want anybody to listen back like, she said that, wow. And you'll say, that's not what I meant. But, you know, hopefully people will hear this and hear that I'm really genuine and not trying to dismiss or discount anybody's story, life, how they feel or how they think. But the seven of us, you know, we just tell our point of view from very different perspectives. And again, not all of us in the story with a child.
So, Courtney, the book is available on Amazon.
It's available on Amazon. You can also buy it directly from me at soulfreemamas with an S.com.
Is there any other avenue that you want people to reach out to you, or is it soulfreemamas.com? Is that the best way?
So Soul Free Mamas is still a very new project for me. So along with the book, there is going to be a retreat for women living with infertility, experiencing pregnancy, and infant loss. So it's coming. But what I really, where I really live is RyanMorgan Events, which is my event planning company named after my babies. And I do all the things events over there. And so that's really where you can find me. RyanMorgan Events, planning all types of events, doing all types of things for my clients. Kristen was one of my clients.
Yes, I was. And I think the beauty behind not only the names, but also, like, let's talk about that for a second before we end. What's the purpose of, like, events for you? How does that play into the grief and what you've gone through? Tell us about why it's important to have events.
Yeah, I also, I was always the one in the family planning the events, the cookouts, the get-togethers. And I remember this one time, two specific events. So one was this like girls' weekend. This is even before I had RyanMorgan. So prior to, I planned this spa weekend for some girlfriends. And we get there, I have like a playlist, I figured out dinner, like all the things. And so one of my girlfriends goes, "Man, you always get this shit right. You always get it right. Like, this is so great. Like, I don't have to think about anything. Like, it's amazing." And then the other time I did this Christmas dinner for my friends. And I showed up at the restaurant with my own tablecloth and my own table decorations. And I say to the hostess, I said, "Can you please put us in the back because we're going to make a lot of noise?" And so again, my girlfriends show up and they're like, "There you go again. You're the only person I know going to bring your own tablecloth to dinner." And I'm like, "Yeah, because I don't want the plain white tablecloth." Right. So I've always been that person. Right. And so for years before having RyanMorgan, I interned, if you will, with this really well-known event planner in the DC area. And the last event I worked with her before I started my own event planning company, she probably doesn't even remember that. So she said to me, "I know you had your situation, but as you build your own business, your clients aren't going to want to hear that." Whew. And in that moment, I wasn't even fazed by it. I was like, "Yeah, you're right. I gotta like," but as I thought about it more, I was just like, that's so not okay. And if there is a client who wouldn't work with me because I've gone through something traumatic, they're probably not the client for me. And so, I mean,
I love that, Courtney. I love that because it's so true. It's like, I think that, I almost don't even have words for that situation, right? Because who we are is who we are.
Who we are is who we are. And like I said, she probably doesn't even remember that she said that because there was no, in my mind, like when I look back on the conversation, there was no malice in the conversation. We actually were out at lunch or like dinner maybe. And there was no malice. And like we really were having a conversation because we had already talked about me going out on my own. So she really, in her mind, probably was thinking, "Let me give her some tips to make her business better, da, da, da." And me in the moment was just like, "Okay, yeah, that's true. That's right." But again, as I drove home and thought about it, I really got upset and was like, that's BS. And if somebody does not want to work with me because of that, they're probably not the client I want. And that's not the type of business I want either. And so RyanMorgan Events was birthed because of that conversation, right? The name. And I was like, I want a place where I can remember my girls. I plan events that are full of joy, that bring people together, that make people happy. I always say I want people to show up and be a guest at their own event, right? And so you hire RyanMorgan Events to plan your event, and all I want my clients to do is show up and be a guest, right? And not have to worry about what time is so-and-so coming? Did somebody bring the chicken? Like all that stuff that, goes into planning the event. And
and you have done that for me twice, right? So you planned my book signing, and in addition to that, you planned my relationship workshop. So I want to thank you because I did just show up. I literally just showed up, and I could be my best self at both of those events. So I want to thank you, Courtney, for sharing your life with us, for really sharing your pain, your joy, your resilience, the story of Hendrix. Thank you so much, because there's so many people that are going to be really helped from everything that you talked about. And I want to thank you for the rawness, the honesty, the not skipping the details, because so often we are not sharing those details, and they're a part of, when we think about the workplace and this concept that there are battles that people are going through that you have no idea.
No idea.
Your story is a testament to that.
Yeah. So, I didn't even talk about like going back to work after it happens, but yeah.
Listen, we got to do a part 2 for that, because that's so, like that's a whole nother story. That's a whole nother story. Yeah.
Yeah. But thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And, I love how you have been able to like grow in this space. It's been amazing to watch the growth. And again, I love the plastic house. I wish I'd come up with that name.
Well, and I'm going to tell you, I'm going to tie it back to, people don't normally know this story, and I'm going to tie it back to this. But I had a coworker, and I came up with this idea, and I ran into her office, and I shared it with her, and I said, there are just times where we are going through, actually, I can't even remember what I said to her. I just kind of, I explained the story to her. I explained the concept behind it. And Courtney, she went to the window and she started crying. Mm-hmm. And she was like, stop, don't talk. Mm. I need a moment. And she just started crying. And that is when I knew that I had something, because to pull this all full circle, she had also experienced the loss of a child. Mm-hmm. And there's all of this pain, there's all of these emotions that we think that don't come out at work, right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And they do as well. So a part of my whole life, a part of my journey and what I do is to really help people process the stuff that they don't think is coming up, but is. Yeah. Right?
And you do it so well. You do it so well. Like, you do it so freaking well.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, again, RyanMorgan Events. You can find Courtney Shorter there. Soul Free Mamas. Courtney, thank you again for sharing everything with us, and for being a guest on the Plastic Couch podcast.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.